promise this time. All right, as I was introduced, my name is Richard Zurawski. I'm the Green Party candidate for Halifax West. I'm also the climate change critic for the Green Party of Canada and Elizabeth May's shadow cabinet. I'm also a councillor for District 12 in HRM. I'm the chair of the Environment and Sustainability Committee for HRM, and I go to school here. I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm hoping one of these days to finish up here. Taking a bit of a hiatus right now. And my thesis is about climate change. I'm a meteorologist, I published books, I'm a published author with Pottersfield Press and a number of other presses, including one on climate change for the Maritimes. I bet you can't guess what I'm going to talk about. I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher in climate change, I'm an expert in climate change. I've been a vocal climate crisis advocate for almost 40 years. I was also a radio talk show host on a variety of stations across Canada, and now I've thrown my hat into the federal ring for the second time. So where to begin with this? I'm running as the Green Party candidate for Halifax West because, really, I have no other option but to run. The climate crisis didn't happen overnight. It's been a train wreck in slow motion brought about by greed, hubris, and deliberate obfuscation. The climate crisis is the biggest existential threat facing humanity ever. And yet it is a political football. We kick it from one goalpost to the other. What is the climate crisis? I expected to be talking to young people. I would say it's your future, but it's all of our future. That's what the climate crisis is. That's what we're destined to see. So how do we respond to this enormous challenge? What is the Green Party of Canada's plan to adapt and mitigate to the climate crisis? On Friday, we got a taste of it. 10,000 people marched in Halifax to protest their frustration and the absolute inaction of our past and incumbent governments. And these strikers had a list of demands. So here's some of the responses to the demands. They had 7 principal demands. The rights of Indigenous peoples. Adopt and implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in full. Our Green Party response is the Green Party is committed to drafting a motion and adopting the UN resolution in the next session of Parliament after the election of 2009. Protection of the most affected groups. Tends to be that in any crisis, there are winners and losers. In this case, there are mostly losers, and most of them come from impoverished countries. Recognize Canada's disproportionate role in the climate crisis. That's what we have to do. And our subsequent responsibility to protect the most vulnerable. Include the addition of climate displacement as a basis for refugee status. Provide climate aid to lower and middle income countries as well as Arctic Canada. It's not immune, which is inordinately experiencing the immediate impacts of global warming and the climate crisis. Our Green Party of Canada response is pretty simple. We're committed to addressing and acting on the moral obligation that Canadians have because of our past emissions. Canada has achieved its current state of technology and standard of living through the unrestricted use of fossil fuels. That era is coming to an end. In the process, we will disproportionately disadvantage those cultures and countries who are not able to do what we have done and empower the current fossil fuel regimes which dominate the globe. Developing societies and countries today do not and cannot use fossil fuels as a result of the climate crisis which Canada has participated in. The Green Party of Canada is committed to providing sanctuary to the most vulnerable, climate refugees and people displaced by climate change, to aid lower and middle-income countries, including Arctic Canada. Number 3 that the protesters were asking for, a just transition. Transition to renewable energy and sustainable transportation infrastructure while guaranteeing opportunity for fossil fuel workers in a new economy is our mandate. We're going to do that. We're nowhere near ready to do it because of past governments, but we will do it. Environmental rights. This was their 4th demand. Enshrine in law the fundamental right to healthy environment. This would include, and not be limited to, the right to safe air, clean water, and healthy soil. The response from the Green Party is a no-brainer. Absolutely. That's exactly what everyone is entitled to. Number 5 is conservation of biodiversity. Maintain and protect old-growth forests, restore cut blocks, reduce habitat fragmentation, and strengthen the protection of at-risk species. Green Party of Canada response is yes. This is number 6. Reject all new fossil fuel extraction or transportation projects, eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, and price pollution. Of course, that's the Green Party of Canada response. And number 7, the last request, is we need bold greenhouse gas emissions targets and legislate net greenhouse gas emission reductions of 75% over 2005 levels by 2030. Our response is a little longer, so bear with me. We are mandating, as the Green Party of Canada, after extensive research, a 60% reduction because that's what the best science is telling us right now. We're an evidence-based decision-making party. That means I don't believe in it. I look at the evidence and make a decision. The IPCC reviews of science said that by 2030, we must have a reduction of 50%. We're going to add an extra 10% as a buffer. And we need to be net zero by 2050 in order to stay below that 1.5 degree threshold, which is catastrophic and which is almost baked in. If new scientific research comes in, then we will modify our aggressive stance on reducing greenhouse gases. So I would ask my 2 colleagues who are going to be speaking what their plans are, how they are responding to the 10,000 that came out. And I think it would be good to have an extended public debate on that. The climate crisis is the GPC prime mover. That's what the Green Party is all about. Because of years of inaction, it's linked to every facet of the government. And no matter where we turn, we see the climate crisis. We do have a plan to integrate our entire economy and lifestyle through the lens of the climate crisis. Issues like student debt and tuition are of enormous concern because when we disengage a portion of our population, they can't participate in our society. And we have burdened students with enormous debt. Current policies are so onerous that student suicide are now becoming an issue. There are 3 in the last 18 months at the University of Toronto alone. We are committed to ending student poverty in the first few weeks in Parliament. The GPC will eliminate student debt immediately and make tuition free in colleges and universities. Other countries have done it with fewer resources than we have. Should be no problem for us. And after you graduate, the Green Party of Canada will guarantee green jobs in the transformation to the green. Carbon will be phased out and green energy jobs will replace them. We're looking at local food sufficiency. We've only got 2 days of food in Nova Scotia. If the transportation grid stops, In 2 days, we run out of food. We no longer grow enough to feed ourselves. Small and medium-sized green businesses need support. We will subsidize them. Subsidies for retrofit homes and businesses are part of the plan. And electric transit and transportation. We need a national energy grid. Electricity has to flow from one end of the country to the other to power these things. It's got to be green electricity. And make corporations pay their fair share. End the neoliberalism, where the billionaires and the centimillionaires keep their money offshore and don't pay taxes. We're going to increase those taxes. So I ask you to look at my fellow candidates before you. Honestly, they represent the crisis that we're in now. The Conservative response, and he's invisible right now, is to consult with the oil lobby, to obfuscate, delay, change the topic to say, hey, look over here, money in your pocket. Look at what Scheer said, look at Ford and Kenny and what Harper did, and then make a decision. At 10 minutes. Oh my goodness, I've got at least another half hour to go. Thank you. Responsibility. It's got to be a triple bottom line. It can't be about party politics. It can't be about caucus politics. And that's what makes the Green Party so wonderful, is that we're not whipped in these moral decisions. Thank you.
I feel like much of what I was going to say has been said already. So I don't have a particular answer to add to this, so I will let someone else ask another question. Thank you very much.
Under the current Liberal regime, but are not part of the party. So she consulted with the Mulroney government regarding the Sierra Club and regarding the environment. In terms of her voting via conscience, I have to take a look at the individual votes. So sort of a carte blanche, lack of social responsibility. It's difficult to speak about that. The leader of the party has stated that we support a certain platform, and it's quite extensive. It's about 150 pages long. You can find it on the website. So I find it difficult to respond to gross generalizations, but I can say the fact that she worked for former Prime Minister Mulroney is absolutely false. Thank you.
So, I thought that she actually worked for a minister of his, but I'll accept. I mean, I'm very good. I mean, I know her well, of course, and I was in law school with her for a long time. I thought she told me, but the thing is, when she said worked for a minister, she made a matter of a contract.
That was certainly the case, that she wasn't part of the Conservative government, which was the implication.
But she has certainly praised, and she felt that Mr. Mulroney's government did a lot of positive things in very
absolutely. As far as the Montreal Protocol went, that was just absolutely outstanding. Canada shone at that particular time. We actually banned CFCs and saved the ozone layer. That was a seminal event in climate justice. So I would say, yes, the Mulroney government did a lot. We also stopped acid rain, which was killing all the maple trees. We had sulfur dioxide that was being put into the atmosphere, and now it's scrubbed out. So Elizabeth May has a long history of doing these things. And I hate to praise the Conservative government, but I have to say that the Conservative government probably did more than any other government in power for climate.
I didn't mean to give you another 2 minutes.
This is do or die moment, literally. You can either keep doing the same thing that we've done in the past, and in this writing, we have done the same thing for a quarter of a century, with all due respect, and expect different results. I don't think so. That's just not going to happen. Or you can make the change now. Vote for change, not to repeat the same path we've been going down. What the Liberals are proposing is just not enough. It's a compromise, and you cannot compromise science. 4 years ago, we voted out of fear, not for something, but against the Harper cons, who muzzled science and scientists and ran up a debt to historic levels and tried to bring legislation to marginalize much of the Canadian population. The fear is that they're going to do it again, or at least that's what the Liberals want you to believe. That the Conservatives are going to get back into power, so you have to vote for them. Don't vote for fear. That's what got us into this pickle. I want you to remember a few promises that were made 4 years ago. This is going to be the last election with first past the post. There are only 2 other countries in the world that use that broken, antiquated, backward system. The United States, look at where it's gotten them, and the UK, not far behind, another sterling example. That promise was broken, and I quote, the Prime Minister said, "I'm the Prime Minister, I get to decide, it's first past the post." Another promise. They promised to address climate change. In 4 years, the amount of CO2 going into the atmosphere has remained steady. As a matter of fact, during some of the Harper years, it was actually lower than it was during the last 4 years. CO2 emissions are now at 415 parts per million. And what about, because this is 2015, regarding women's rights and progress in politics? Ask Jody Wilson-Raybould how that worked out, and Jane Philpott. And speaking of Jody Wilson-Raybould, ask yourself how she feels about a Prime Minister wearing brownface and his relationship with the First Nations skin color, or color of any of our Canadian multicultural mosaic. I was ashamed to be a Canadian when I saw that. And then we look at the SNC-Lavalin affair, backing a company that bribed Muammar Gaddafi's son with $40 million, one of the most corrupt regimes in the world. And now they tried to weasel out of that with the Liberal government help, and led to the SNC debacle, which is not finished yet. Or what about the sale of billions of dollars of armored vehicles, which are going to be outfitted as weapons of death in Saudi Arabia? You know that they are, that they cannot paper over that moral disaster. And according to the UN, the Saudi Arabian-Yemeni war is the worst genocide in the world going on today. And that's what we're part of. Is this the party that you want to lead you? A party whose only mandate is to stay in power, say anything, and won't betide anybody who breaks with that. This is a party that was happy to declare a climate emergency in one breath and buy a pipeline with the next. The words that we use are crucial in this election. And from what we've seen from the inconsistencies of the Liberal statements, we should be wary of accepting them at face value. Because all the promises they're making now can be broken just as easily. And finally, what we're looking at is climate change. First and last. Canada is the worst per capita Western country in the world for CO2 emissions outside of the Arab oil-producing countries. And yes, every other Canadian government has been so bad that the Liberals actually look pretty good, with the exception of the Mulroney government. And the Liberals are not alone when it comes to having a proclivity for mangling some of our climate targets. The reason we're in this fix, this mess, is because we've had a decade of the Harper era. It gives you an idea of the binary that we've been flipping back and forth. And if you look at the sheer cons, we want to put money in your pockets is what they say. But they don't want to address climate change, and they don't want to attend the debates. Because it's an embarrassment. It is an absolute atrocity. The climate crisis thing, they will never conform to what the scientists say. They will never address the science, as long as they take their marching orders from the fossil fuel interests. So, here's my plea. Look at what has happened in the last 4 years, and look at where we must go in the next 4 years, and vote Green.